late 1946, a highly classified government program called VENONA was working to combat Soviet intelligence. The VENONA program began breaking Soviet codes transmitted by cables between Moscow and the United States. The program uncovered a large spy ring led by Julius Rosenberg. In July 1950, Julius Rosenberg was arrested. As Julius and Ethel Rosenberg received their sentence, the judge told them,
"I consider your crime a crime worse than murder. By your betrayal, you have undoubtedly altered the course of history to the disadvantage of our country."
On Friday, June 19, 1953, all appeals to save the Rosenbergs were denied. The executions were scheduled to take place that night at Sing Sing Prison in New York. The Rosenbergs maintained their innocence until the end. By 8:30 p.m., the Rosenbergs were dead. Their executions would make them lasting symbols of American Cold War fear and paranoia. Many years later, evidence surfaced that proved the Rosenbergs did share classified information.
Anti-Japanese networks devised by the United States, China and the Soviet Union that put Japan into a quagmire. Anti-Japanese propaganda drive staged in pre-war U.S. After the Second Sino-Japanese War broke out in 1937, the Roosevelt administration of the United States accelerated its oppressive diplomacy toward Japan, resulting in the attack on Pearl Harbor by the cornered Japanese. It is scarcely known in Japan how anti-Japanese and China-friendly American public opinion was made at that time, which pushed the U.S.'s oppressive diplomacy against Japan. I intentionally used the expression "was made" because in pre-war America, just as is the case today, wide and fanatical anti-Japanese propaganda campaigns were in full swing, accusing the Japanese army of atrocities it committed during the Second Sino-Japanese War, the Sino-Japanese Incident. It was What War Means, edited by Harold J. Timperley, special correspondent to China for the British Manchester Guardian, that was highly valued as source material that verified the Nanking Massacre, cited as the most moving example of the Japanese Army's atrocities. What War Means was a propaganda book edited by Timperley by the request of the Central Propaganda Department of the Chinese Nationalist Party. According to the top-secret report titled Outline of Operations, International Propaganda Office, Central Propaganda Department, this confidential report was recently unearthed by Higashi Nakano Shudo, professor at Asia University. Furthermore, Timperley himself acted as an advisor to the Central Propaganda Department. While Timperley was overtly a special correspondent to China for the British Manchester Guardian, covertly, he was a secret agent for the Chinese Nationalist Party. In July 1938, when What War Means was published in New York, an anti-Japanese organization was also founded at that time with the purpose of accusing the Japanese of military aggression and urging the United States government to cut trade with Japan. The organization was named the American Committee for Non-Participation in Japanese Aggression, hereafter called the American Committee. The Second Sino-Japanese War started in July 1937, triggered by the Marco Polo Bridge incident, which took place in the outskirts of Beijing. Though the Japanese government initially held to the policy of not expanding the war any further, The Japanese army, fed up by being incessantly enticed by a provocative Chinese army, was forced to expand the front beyond Beijing to Shanghai, and then to Nanking. Despite the fact that the war was in fact caused by provocation on the part of the Chinese, the American Committee asserted that the cause of the Sino-Japanese War lies in the militarist Japan's aggressive policy. It is the United States that largely provides the Japanese army with fuel and war supplies. To prevent the atrocious Japanese army from further invading China, the U.S. government should act on the trade ban against Japan. In a booklet, 60,000 copies, titled America's Share in Japan's War Guilt and published simultaneously with the establishment of the committee. Subsequently, on August 1, the committee distributed 22,000 copies of a pamphlet titled War Guilt to all of the members of Congress, both the Senate and the House of Representatives. Colleges and universities, Christian bodies, women's organizations, business associations, international relations societies, and labor unions across the country. The American Committee conducted a far-reaching public relations drive, boasting among its founders writer Helen Keller, who was popularly known as the "miracle worker" with her triple handicaps. With such a prominent public figure, the committee successfully attracted much attention from the mass media. The Chinese Nationalist Party's Central Propaganda Department was behind the American Committee. One cannot help but wonder how the committee obtained the money necessary to cover expenses for printing and mailing 60,000 copies of the 80-page booklet as well as 20,000 copies of the pamphlet. Unlike the present day, with ubiquitous personal computers, it would have taken a huge amount of desk work just to write mailing addresses. It would have been impossible without strong organizational support. Then how did the American Committee come to be established, and what kind of groups supported it? Relating to the process of how the American Committee was established, readers are advised to read a book entitled Meiroshi no Shinchitsujo to Agia Tahayo, Illusion of New Order for Asia Pacific, written by Mazawa, publisher, Sarusha. According to the book, the idea of this committee was initially conceived by Harry Price, a former professor at Yanjing, Beijing University, and his younger brother Frank Price, a famed missionary stationed in China. Upon learning that 80% of the Japanese army's fuel was being imported from the United States, the ex-professor consulted with his missionary brother, who was in New York for a short vacation. And then they tried to persuade their China expert friends and acquaintances living in New York into creating influential public opinion in the United States with the aim of supporting the Chinese to fight against Japan and sanctions against the Japanese militarism. To sum up, the committee was reportedly contrived out of personal initiative. However, Frank Price, then briefly in New York, was also a secret agent with the position of Chief of Staff at the English-language editorial committee of the Chinese Nationalist Party's Central Propaganda Department. According to the aforementioned top-secret document of the Nationalist Party unearthed by Professor Higashi Nakano, the American Committee might have been part of the operations conducted by the Chinese Nationalist Party to get America on the Chinese side. With this in mind, the list of the committee's founders was re-examined and revealed one other member of the Chinese Nationalist Party's propaganda department, namely, Earl Leaf, former special correspondent to China for the Up News Agency. According to the autobiography of Ceng Zubai, manager of the International Propaganda Office, Leaf was in charge of the New York office of the Trans-Pacific News Service, which was a propaganda machine of the Nationalist Party. Surprisingly, George Fitch was also among the founders, who was a chief staff member at the Chinese YMCA, Protestant Young Men's Christian Association. Fitch was one of the authors of the aforementioned What War Means, edited by Timperley. At the beginning of 1938, Fitch was supposedly in Nanking during its occupation by the Japanese army. How, then, was it possible for Fitch's name to be listed among the founders of the American Committee in New York? Fortunately, the translations of letters written by Timperley, editor of What War Means, are included in Nanking Incident source material, edited by Nanking and Science Research Group. According to the letters, it was Timperley's idea, as an advisor to the Chinese Nationalist Party's Central Propaganda Department, to have Fitch spread propaganda alleging atrocities committed by the Japanese army in then-occupied Nanking. Fitch escaped from Nanking and flew from Shanghai to be in the United States in April. Fitch was instructed by Timperley to visit America, and it was most likely that Fitch met Price, another secret agent for China, in New York and joined in the consultation over the establishment of the American Committee, benefactor of Christianity. Chiang Kai-shek, among the founders of the American Committee, another YMCA staff member listed besides Fitch was Margaret Falsis of the YMCA and North American Federation. Why was the YMCA so involved? With its vast organizational power in European and American Christian societies? Further examination has revealed that, behind the scenes, the YMCA and Chiang Kai-shek's Chinese nationalist government were closely linked together. The story goes back to the Treaty of Tianjin of 1858. Guaranteed missions in China by the treaty. European and American Christian missions sent one missionary after another to China. In particular, the YMCA and North American Federation, established in 1864, placed much emphasis on missions in China. How the YMCA clearly differed from other mission groups was that wherever they went for missions, they built assembly halls instead of churches and stationed full-time workers, called work secretaries, to manage and run those halls, where a wide range of educational and medical service activities were conducted, such as teaching English to the local youths. The first YMCA assembly hall in China was built in Tianjin in 1897. By 1924, there were 313 Chinese work secretaries employed. Besides the Chinese staff, nearly 90 Americans were sent to China from the North American YMCA, and Fitch was one of them. In close cooperation with the overwhelmingly influential YMCA in China, various Protestant groups founded colleges and universities in rapid succession. As of 1916, there were 24 universities in China, of which 14 were Christian private universities founded and run by Christian missions. However, in 1923, the Chinese Nationalist Party shifted to a united front coalition with the Chinese Communist Party, and the latter began to organize students and workers, loudly advocating xenophobic nationalism. As a result, the Christian universities were hit hard, where students held demonstrations and strikes almost daily, demanding abolition of the required religious education curriculum and restraint of YMCA activities. The tumult led to a drop of 30% in the number of students entering the Christian universities in 1927, and some universities even faced the grave possibility of closing down. It was Chiang Kai-shek who saved the Christian universities from the peril of radical student movements. As strongholds for missions, those universities were established with huge amounts of money and human resources. The All-China Student Unions, which led the student movements, was secretly maneuvered by the Chinese Communist Party, with such masterminds as Zhou Enlai, called the Hawk of the Stalin Group, fearing at the time that the Nationalist Party might be taken over by the Communists. Chiang Kai-shek resolutely suppressed the Communists in Shanghai in April 1927, coup d'état of April 12, and broke the Nationalist-Communist alliance in July. That abruptly ended the stormy student movements once and for all. Simultaneously, Chiang Kai-shek began the Northern Expedition to subdue warlords that were rampant throughout the country in July 1926. In June 1928, he occupied Beijing and had almost unified all of China. Moreover, Chiang Kai-shek remarried Song Meiling, a Christian, in December 1927, and after becoming head of the nationalist government in Nanking, he was baptized as a Christian in October 1930. Thus, American Christian societies like the YMCA highly appreciated Christian Chiang Kai-shek, engaged in the difficult task of unifying warlord rampant China, cited him as China's George Washington and Christian benefactor, and ardently supported him. The Chiang Kai-shek YMCA network consequently, to American Christians such as YMCA members. The Second Sino-Japanese War naturally meant the struggle in China of Chiang Kai-shek, the heroic supporter of Christianization, against the heathen Japanese. Fully aware of this psychology, Chiang Kai-shek immediately sent Wang Zhengting as an ambassador to the United States. Wang was a former Chinese YMCA head of secretaries and later foreign minister. One can easily imagine that Ambassador Wang made full use of his YMCA connection in maneuvering the United States towards supporting China. The effects of sending Wang to the U.S. were seen in three spheres. First, the aforementioned American Committee was established with the support of the YMCA and North American Federation. Most likely, detailed consultations over the establishment of the committee were repeatedly held among Ambassador Wang, Fitch, and secret agents Price and Leaf from the Chinese Nationalist Party's Central Propaganda Department. Second, under the leadership of J.R. Mott, president of the YMCA World Federation. Three international mission institutes, having close relationships with China, established a national campaign organization called the Church Committee for China Relief (CCCR) in July 1938. At the same time of the establishment of the American Committee, the CCCR launched relief activities for China. Former president of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce H. Sylvie became chairman of the CCCR, with Mott as deputy chairman, and the CCCR came to have tremendous political influence over 125,000 Protestant churches and nearly as many related mission institutes. As a probable consequence, S. Hornbeck, who was an old acquaintance of Ambassador Wang Zhengting and an advisor to the U.S. Secretary of State, asserted to change the isolationist air prevailing in American society and to boost public interest in Asian issues. We should carry out a propaganda campaign, and secretly supported the establishment of the American Committee. Hornbeck also tried to convince his boss, Secretary of State Hull, telling him, if China and others should fail to stop Japanese aggression, the United States and Japan will eventually clash in the arena of international politics and sooner or later will have to decisively confront each other. This might explain the following turn of event. President Roosevelt, who had previously held a firm neutral position toward the Sino-Japanese War, now, with the intention of checking Japan, decided to grant a $25 million lease to the Chinese nationalist government in December and steered toward supporting China. As mentioned previously, there were 125,000 churches under the CCCR umbrella, which, in terms of church members, would amount to tens of millions of potential voters. That was a figure President Roosevelt could hardly afford to ignore, for the president had to keep winning elections, no matter what. Furthermore, simultaneously that December, the American Committee became even more powerful. Roger Green, former American Consul General stationed in Hankou, China, was appointed chairman of the American Committee, and former Secretary of State Stimson, a renowned hardliner toward Japan, had also become its honorary chairman. The following year, on January 19, 1939, these appointments were officially announced. And the next day, Song Sirwin, Chiang Kai-shek's brother-in-law, sent a congratulatory telegram to Honorary Chairman Stimson on behalf of the Chinese nationalist government. The telegram read to the effect of the establishment of the American Committee is an epoch-making event in the efforts to prevent Japan's aggression against China, and trade sanctions against Japan mean a victory to China as well as heralding peace and justice to the world. The telegram showed that the Chinese Nationalist Party had great expectations of the American Committee. Rockefeller Foundation backs IPR becoming more anti-Japanese. The third influence by the YMCA is seen in the decision made by the IPR Institute of Pacific Relations, a world-leading think tank on Asia-Pacific issues, to publish the think tank's inquiry series criticizing Japanese aggression in reference to the Sino-Japanese War. In February 1938, barely 2 months after the surrender of Nanking, IPR Secretary General Edward Carter, former secretary at the YMCA India, made the suggestion to local IPR branches that a full inquiry into the Far East conflict be made. Taken aback by this plan, the Japanese branch expressed strong objection, already being alerted of the anti-Japanese, China-friendly stance of the IPR headquarters. Notwithstanding the Japanese protest, Secretary General Carter kept consultations with other IPR branches in respective countries, and in December 1938, the IPR finally decided to publish its inquiry series. This decision was backed by the Rockefeller Foundation, which had been financing the IPR to work on the inquiry series. The fact is that Jerome Green, IPR Director General, was the brother of Roger Green, who was, in turn, director of the Rockefeller Foundation and Director General of the American Committee. The IPR was initially established as a consequence of the Pan-Pacific YMCA conference held in Hawaii in July 1925 by the YMCA and North American Federation to discuss the current situation, assembling the work secretaries who are stationed in various parts of Asia. Later, the IPR also began to recruit outside experts besides YMCA people. However, as the IPR Secretary General from the YMCA India indicates, the core of the IPR was invariably occupied by those concerned with the YMCA. The key contributor to the establishment of the IPR was J.R. Mott, then president of the YMCA and North American Federation, who later became deputy chairman of the CCCR and president of the YMCA World Federation. Incidentally, the Australian delegate who participated in consultations concerning the IPR inquiry series was none other than Timperley, a secret agent for the Chinese Nationalist Party's propaganda department. After having compiled What War Means, Timperley went to the United States, where he engaged in anti-Japanese maneuvering operations for the IPR. Subsequently, the IPR published one booklet after another, decrying Japan's aggression against China, which not only tremendously influenced foreign policies of various countries in Europe as well as America, but also determined the framework of the American occupation policy against Japan. During the war, the IPR distributed huge volumes of propaganda pamphlets, urging "Know Your Enemy Japan" to armies and governments, thus playing a perfect role in permeating the anti-Japanese prejudice and branding Japan as a military fascist state. Moreover, the IPR also cooperated in the production of the propaganda film titled Know Your Enemy Japan, directed by Frank Capra. The film spitefully depicts such matters as the Tanaka Memorandum, which testified to Japan's ambition to conquer the world, the Nanking Massacre, and brainwashing by means of nationalist Shinto. The film served as the source for prosecuting the Nanking Massacre at the Tokyo trials. Real face of the anti-Japanese propaganda uncovered by top-secret Ministry of Foreign Affairs documents. As mentioned so far, behind the American Committee, with former Secretary of State Stimson as its honorary chairman, were the Chinese Nationalist Party secret agents and the YMCA IPR network. Moreover, recently disclosed top-secret Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan documents at that time revealed that there was yet another group manipulating the network. This was a group of men secretly working for Communist Party USA. Since 2002, the Japan Center for Asian Historical Records has been disclosing on the Internet top-secret documents of the time, which are housed in the National Archives of Japan, the Diplomatic Record Office of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan, and the Military Archives of the National Institute for Defense Studies. Among them is a confidential document dated July 20, 1938, and labeled Top Secret Number 560, about propaganda conducted by the Chinese here in this area, which was sent to Foreign Minister Ugaki Kazushige by Consul General Wakasugi Kanami in New York. In Top Secret Number 560, the following analyses were made. 1. Regarding anti-Japanese propaganda in the United States, there are roughly 3 types of promoters: the Chinese Nationalist Party, Christian, humanitarian groups, and the American Communist Party. They keep in touch with each other. 2. The anti-fascism, pro-democracy goal upheld by the Communists has become the guiding principle for various groups. 3. The most radical attackers of Japan in the United States are the American Communist Party and its front organizations. They aim to worsen the relationship between Japan and the United States, and directly support and encourage the Chinese to maintain their resistance for as long as possible, and, thus, indirectly weaken Japan's pressure against the Soviet Union. 4. Furthermore, under cover of these front organizations, the Communists, while disguising their true identity, can easily mingle among various sections of American society and have succeeded in building up great influence. Following these analyses, the document explains the front organizations of the American Communist Party. 5. The American League for Peace and Democracy acts in accordance with the guiding policy of the U.S. Communist Party. The League is a huge organization with branches in 109 cities in 24 states across the U.S., covering 2,000 groups and 3 million members. Under this league, the Conference for China Relief was established and, with guidance by Philip Jaffe, they conduct the most energetic activities, organizing anti-Japanese boycotts and strikes to protest Japanese aggression against China, and lobbying congressmen for a ban on Japanese trade. 6. The Institute of Pacific Relations (IPR) is recognized to have a close relationship with the Communist Party, particularly F.V. Field, central figure of the IPR U.S. branch, is editorial manager of Eurasia magazine, whose editor-in-chief is Jaffe, mastermind of the American League for Peace and Democracy. The editorial department of the magazine and the IPR are located in the same building. In addition, the Japanese delegate attending the IPR International General Assembly for 1936 was Ozaki Hatsumi of the Sorge Group. 7. The American Friends of the Chinese People was established in 1933 as an anti-Japanese propaganda organ under the auspices of the American Communist Party, but at present it serves as a training center for activists participating in anti-Japanese actions. Maxwell Stoyart, editor of The Nation, is the president. Subsequently, another top-secret MOFA document, dated August 18, Top Secret No. 677 reports, in reference to the establishment of the American Committee, as follows. 1. The American Committee was established as a front organization of the American Communist Party and the American League for Peace and Democracy. Superficially, it pretends not to have anything to do with the Communist Party, to win those who have anti-communist ideas over to their side. 2. The committee is nominal. The truth is that the real identity of the American Committee is the American League for Peace and Democracy. How should one evaluate these analyses? First, Jaffe, leader of the American League for Peace and Democracy, and Stewart, president of American Friends of the Chinese People, both of whom were referred to as communists, were in fact among the founders of the American Committee. Moreover, China Today, organ of American Friends of the Chinese People, which was identified as a front organization of the U.S. Communist Party by Top Secret Document Number 560, had T.A. Bisson, research associate at the Foreign Policy Association, as a member of its editorial committee. Bisson was also listed among the founders of the American Committee. It was the Comintern that was pulling strings after all, if the analyses made by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan are right. Then it turns out that the American Committee was an affiliate of the American League for Peace and Democracy and, furthermore, it was controlled from behind the scenes by communist secret agents like Jaffe. One of the MOFA's analyses relating to the assertion that the American League for Peace and Democracy was a front organization of the Communist Party USA has been verified by top-secret documents of the former Soviet Union. Since 1992, the Russian Yeltsin administration has disclosed the top-secret documents of the former Soviet Union at the Center for Preservation and Study of Russian Contemporary Historical Records. The Secret World of American Communism, a book written by Harvey Clear based on the study of those confidential, old Soviet documents, asserts that the American League Against War and Fascism, the original organization of the American League for Peace and Democracy, was a group that was dominated by communists. For that matter, it is doubtful whether people like ex-Secretary of State Stimson, who had accepted the honorary chair of the American Committee, advisor to the Secretary of State Hornbeck, who indirectly supported the committee, and Professor Price and Fitch from the YMCA, both of whom had been working for the Chinese Nationalist Party, were at all aware of the fact that the Communist Party USA was behind them. Perhaps all they knew about Stuart Bisson and Jaffe, who were also listed among the founders, was that these three were merely another group of intellectuals angry at fascism and Japanese aggression against China. At any rate, Eurasia, whose editor-in-chief was Jaffe, was generally perceived as a magazine specializing in Asian affairs when it was first published. So, Hornbeck, then chief of the Bureau of Far Eastern Affairs of the U.S. Department of State, a very influential position, even contributed to the magazine's first issue, March 1936, in a personal capacity. Incidentally, in June 1945, the editorial department of Eurasia, including Jaffe, was exposed as having illegally obtaining top-secret U.S. government documents. The Communist Party's deception was perfectly elaborate to the extent that it should be admired. However, it was revealed that, unlike Japan, the American public under the Roosevelt administration was alarmingly indifferent to the potential threats of the Soviet Union and the Communist Party. It was not until late 1939 that the American government, or specifically the FBI, tightened their surveillance and monitoring of the American Communist Party. Still, it was only in 1946, after World War II ended, that the American government finally obtained evidence that the Communist Party USA had been in charge of maneuvering intelligence for the Comintern. This was done by successfully wiretapping and decoding encrypted messages of Soviet intelligence. The decrypted intelligence was published in the VENONA Secret in 1995. According to the book, Jaffe, a leading figure in anti-Japanese propaganda activities, Bisson and Field of the IPR U.S. branch were secret agents working for the Comintern. Jaffe, in particular, who was practically steering the American Committee as the leader of the American League for Peace and Democracy, was a friend of Earl Browder, Secretary General of the American Communist Party. Thus, the analyses made at that time by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs have proved to be mostly correct. The anti-Japanese United Pacific Front was perfected. Evidence does exist that the Comintern instructed the American Communist Party on how to effectively carry out anti-Japanese propaganda operations. On December 25, 1937, immediately after Nanking fell, the Chinese Communist Party held a Central Committee meeting and announced the declaration of the Chinese Communist Party on the current situation, urging the worldwide staging of anti-Japanese propaganda campaigns. Subsequently, in May 1938, the Comintern sent out the following orders to various international branches, communist parties in respective countries and labor unions, etc. 1. Further promote international campaigns to support China and spread propaganda decrying the sinful Japanese and praising the heroic Chinese. 2. Hold anti-Japanese rallies and demonstrations more frequently. 3. Organize and expand such activities as to represent the Chinese people's animosity toward Japan, boycotting Japanese products and refusing port labor to unload Japanese products and load war supplies for Japan. It was only 3 months after these instructions were sent that the American Committee was established through developing the American League for Peace and Democracy for the purpose of spreading guilty Japanese propaganda and urging anti-Japanese boycotts. Ultimately, those secret agents working for the American Communist Party and the Chinese Nationalist Party with such superficial titles as former missionary, scholar and magazine editor, all devotedly conducted anti-Japanese propaganda activities, resulting in an ever-worsening hostile public opinion toward Japan. With the support of this anti-Japanese and pro-Chinese public opinion, President Roosevelt and Secretary of War Stimson promoted, in tandem, more rigorous, oppressive diplomacy toward Japan, which culminated in 1941 in a war between Japan and the United States. On December 9, 2 days after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, the Chinese Communist Party, deciding that the anti-Japanese United Pacific Front was completed by the outbreak of war between Japan and the United States, announced China's support for the United States and Great Britain entering war against Japan. Lenin formed the Communist International Comintern in 1919. With the purpose of converting the world to communism, and made a speech in 1920 to the following effect: in today's capitalist world, the primary conflict we should exploit is the relationship between Japan and the United States. And our practical policy issue as communists is to exploit this mutual animosity brewing between the two countries and have them bitterly confront each other. Then will arise a new state of affairs. As early as 25 years prior to the actual attack on Pearl Harbor, the Soviet Union and the Comintern had been secretly plotting in various countries of the world with a grand plan to build up an anti-Japanese United Pacific Front, whereby they intended to use America as a tool to strike at Japan. They finally achieved that goal. Presently in Japan, concerning the Yasukuni Shrine problem, many people are asking again who was really responsible for the war. These arguments should be impartially based on the testimonies revealed in various top-secret documents that have been disclosed one after another by the former Soviet Union, the United States, the Chinese Nationalist Party and Japan. We should strictly refrain from becoming so intellectually lazy as to fall back on conventional views. At the present, as well as in the past, Japan's course is to be decided in the context of relations with other countries of the world. Therefore, such a narrow-minded perception as to lay all of the blame of the war on the Japanese leaders at that time will never enable us to see the true history. In order to survive in this international community, still rife with secret maneuvering and political propaganda, we must re-examine what really happened behind the scenes during the war, to the best of our intellectual capacity, taking into consideration all of those source materials newly discovered in various parts of the world.
When time shall have softened passion and prejudice, when reason shall have stripped the mask from misrepresentation, then justice, holding evenly her scales, will require much of past censure and praise to change places. Radhabinod Paul.